Well, it's been one of those campaign weeks where lots has happened, but what real impact has it all had? Time for a serious assessment. Allan, Andrew, and Chantal are all here. I asked Charlie Sheen to come by and sit in with us, but he couldn't make it. He's
winning.
He was looking for a place to smoke, and they're not allowed to smoke in here. Okay, we're halfway through the campaign. Where are we at, aside from being at the halfway marker? Allan.
It's a little bit like a one-period hockey game where one team starts with 2 goals up. The complicating factor, of course, is that in English Canada, you have 3 teams on the ice, and in Quebec, you have 4 teams on the ice. So not only do the opponents have a lot to gain or to pick up in a fairly short period of time, but the prospect of someone shooting the puck in the wrong net has increased exponentially too. So we have, for example, if Mr. Layton has the momentum coming out of both the English and French language debates, if, as it seems, healthcare is becoming an increasing issue, we have the prospect of a real race for second. If, in turn, the NDP gets over 20, then you have very, very difficult time for the Liberal Party, where they have to fight on 2 flanks, both the Conservatives and the New Democrats. If that happens, they even run the risk of being marginalized in a Stop Harper campaign if it transpires in the last days. So there's lots of interesting stuff that could still happen.
You know, it's interesting when you look back at debates. It's not uncommon for the NDP to come out of debates with a bit of momentum. Is it any different this time in terms of what they can do with that, Chantal?
I guess it depends on where the Liberals discover that they are in a couple of days. You can see now that the parties are all wondering what they came out of and where they really are. And once you see where Mr. Ignatieff starts going, if he starts going to Liberal ridings, if he starts going to places where you wouldn't go if you were going to make gains, then you would think that they are in mortal danger. And what's interesting about where we are at half campaign is this was always going to be a very dangerous campaign for the opposition parties. And at the halfway mark, it is a very dangerous campaign for the Liberals and possibly for the NDP. And by the way, Joe Clark won both of his debates when he was Conservative leader of the last installment. Mm-hmm. And he barely hung on to party status, official party status, 12 seats on voting day.
That's right. Andrew, where are you on all this?
Oh, I'm still trying to sort out Allan's metaphor, but
trying to be relevant in the playoffs.
That was a paid ad for the CBC. Don Cherry dialed that one in for him.
Beyond that, look, we looked to be tightening before the debates, particularly in Ontario, which, as we all know, is the centerpiece of this whole thing. We just don't know what impact the debates are going to have, so to some extent we're kind of flying blind here. I do think there is a remorseless logic to the Prime Minister's campaign about framing this as us against those 3, whether you want a coalition or not, and it does put Michael Ignatieff and the Liberals in a box that they've been trying to break out and doing a very good job of as far as it went. But they do face this problem of center-right voters looking at them and saying if they get in, then they get sort of pulled left by the NDP. At the same time, you've got NDP voters looking at this and saying, why do I need to respond to the traditional Liberal fear campaign of having to vote for them? I can vote for Jack. And I think you're seeing both of those things operative here.
Now, if a string of polls showed a definitive Conservative majority, I think at this point it could be good news for the Liberals, because that would help them focus minds, especially in Ontario, on this is what it is.
Only if they had a good, solid 6 to 8 point lead over the New Democrats.
Yeah,
that's what's so interesting.
But the thing is, until that happens, and as long as you're in that mushy environment that we've been in since the beginning of the campaign, for number 2 place, not for number 1 place, that's pretty clear who's ahead. The Liberals are not able to change the reality that Jack Layton has votes and Gilles Duceppe has votes, and no longer do you look to the Liberal leader as the default leader. That was so apparent on the Quebec debate. In the old days, you'd have the sovereigntists and the Liberals. And they had that exchange on national unity last night, except there are 2 other players who are saying, you're no longer the alternative to the sovereigntists.
The problem is that Harper, I don't think at this point, doesn't have a majority in reach, and it's very difficult in the current lineup. You know, in 2008, he had a 12-point margin of victory in the popular vote and still couldn't get a majority. If you go back to the 80s or any time before that, you could always get a majority with that kind of margin. But with the spread of the vote amongst 5 parties. And when you get the support for the top party, the leading party, down into the high 30s, they actually have to get a wider margin than they would have in the past over the second-place party. Why? Because they have to get a lot of split votes going their way in order to get their majority. They got to get the Liberals down near the NDP vote.
Well, in fact, there's a scenario where the Conservatives could actually win as many seats as they did in 2006 with even less votes than they had because of those splits. So there's all kinds of different permutations.
If they get a more efficient allocation.
If we see a little movement in this next 2 weeks.
All right. I've tried to stay away from polls for a number of different reasons. But what I'm trying to do is gauge from other things where the parties at least feel they may be. They all came out with new ads in the last 24 hours, and there are varying degrees of negativity about each other from them. A couple of excerpts, 3 excerpts from the Liberals, the Tories, and the NDP. So let's have a look at them and try and judge what it probably tells us about what they're thinking about where they are. Here they are.
2011, and Michael Ignatieff wants to be Prime Minister. But what has he done for you? He didn't bother to show for 2/3 of the key confidence votes last year, and he had the worst attendance record of all 308 members of Parliament. Not so great leadership.
Michael Ignatieff has a problem with the truth. He told us he never voted in a U.S. election. But while away, he told the British he was an American, a Democrat, and that he would vote in the upcoming U.S. election. He said one thing while abroad and another back in Canada.
Stephen Harper is demanding absolute power. Can you trust him with your health care? He said the law that protects universal health care should be scrapped, and he's open to American-style private-for-profit health care. Where would Harper's cuts leave your family's health?
All right, Allan, you're the ad expert. What do these tell us about what they're thinking about where they are?
Well, normally when you see someone going negative, it's because their positive campaign isn't working. I mean, the Conservatives have not been able to make any headwind since the writs were issued. They've always known that the easiest way to mobilize their support is putting the focus on Mr. Ignatieff. I think that's all we're seeing there. The Liberals...
And they haven't changed that.
No.
I mean, there's been some sense in the last week or so that they may be backing off the hammer Ignatieff, but not now.
No, not at all, because I don't think they're making any headway right now. The Liberals, what they're trying to do, they've moved off. This is about the 4th time they've changed their basic messaging, and they've moved off the notion that the values of the Conservatives are wrong. Look at their spending. Now they're trying to drag them into social policy and dredge up the whole notion that these are black-hearted accountants who really can't be counted on to do the right thing in terms of health care. The difficulty here is that I'm not sure that the NDP don't have better bona fides on this, and they may be actually hurting their interests. The NDP is probably most interesting. It might be premature what they're doing, but they're clearly signaling that they think they do have a shot at second, and that one of the ways of getting that is to move the Liberals right down to the low 20s.
The easiest way for the NDP to hang on to its vote is actually to go for the number 2 spot and to go after Ignatieff. That is, in this case, the best offense is also the best defense.
Except it's an admission that they can't stop Stephen Harper, and that no one can stop Stephen Harper.
Actually, the NDP has no interest in pushing this stop Stephen Harper thing factually, because what they need is to beat Liberals, and they have to stop their votes from coalescing behind Michael Ignatieff. That's the short-term interest. The healthcare stuff, actually, the Conservative record might be better than the Liberal record on healthcare. They are the ones who cut transfers to the provinces. Stephen Harper very skillfully lined his party behind the healthcare accord in 2004, never budged from it, never touched it, and has bulletproofed himself in this campaign when he came out suddenly and said, oh, sure, I'm going to increase it 6% a year. So it's very hard to find in what Mr. Harper has done as leader or in power anything that could be construed as an attack on the healthcare system.
When the single-minded focus of both the Tory and the NDP ads on Ignatieff either means one of two things. He's either a great asset for the Liberal Party that they need to degrade, or he's vulnerable, and I think it's more the latter. He came in as an unknown quantity to a great extent to a lot of people in this campaign, didn't have a strong English language debate. I think to some extent there's blood in the water in that respect. The Liberals trying to go after the Tories have this problem that Stephen Harper's a very much a known quantity for good or ill. So what they've instead done is they start quickly on he's demanding absolute power, which is a bit over the top, but they tie that autocratic tendency, shall we say, to what they hope will be a vulnerability on healthcare. The problem is, having said on that feverish day where they all announced that they would increase spending by 6% per year, It may be bad policy, but it did insulate them. And I don't think anybody sensible thinks that we're going to have to scrap health care because the Tories are going to take $4 billion out of spending. I mean, you can get $4 billion out of spending without scrapping the Canada Health Act or getting rid of health care. The big threat to health care is the coming aging of the population, the demographic bulge. That's the big threat that none of them are really facing up to.
But the advantage of health care for both opposition parties is that it isn't an issue of sheer competence. It's an issue of caring. And on that front, they beat the Conservatives every time, regardless of what the record is.
Yes.
I'm still a little puzzled about what's happened to the Liberals, because if you're right, it kind of flies in the face of a lot of the commentary of the first half of the campaign.
Mm-hmm. That they ran a good campaign.
That they've been running a good campaign, that he looks better than a lot of people thought he was going to do, that he did not badly in the debates, questions about the English language debate, but not last night. Why is he in trouble if you're right? Why is Ignatieff in trouble? Why are the NDP rising against him? Like, why are their levels rising? And his are either...
I don't think that I don't think they've ran a bad campaign, but I think they are running a bad campaign on a cushion of thin air. There is nothing to sustain it. So, and I frankly, when I look at those ads and I listen to what we've been saying, it looks to me like the Liberals were always the big goose of federal politics, and both of them are plucking it in front of our eyes. Yeah. And it doesn't really matter that we say he wasn't so bad, because in many regions of the country, the West, Quebec, there is no Liberal infrastructure. Yes. As good as Mr. Ignatieff can be, he's not going to win Alberta or Francophone Quebec. Not going to happen.
Where are you on this?
Well, I mean, I think we might be into the territory of kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, I think the Liberals did have a good first 2 weeks. I also thought that Mr. Ignatieff probably exceeded what were very low expectations in that. But there, as much as we talk about the commitment and the motivation of the conservative base, there is a very committed anti-conservative base out there too, and that is looking for a home, a way to stop the Conservatives who believe the Conservative government is bad government. And if it looks like the Liberals are on the wane, they will look for someplace else to nest. And so you may have just kind of the notion that nothing's happening with Ignatieff, he's not popular, therefore we better start looking around.
And also, I mean, the Liberals invested very heavily in going after the left-wing vote. They really needed to push the NDP way, way down, and all of their platform is aimed at that. If they don't succeed in that, and if Jack is getting this boomlet that we seem to be seeing in the polls, then it's really bad news for them, because much of the Conservative campaign rests on the idea that the Liberals can't possibly form a government on their own. They're too far back. The best, all that could happen would be a Liberal minority in cahoots with these other parties. And as long as that seems inevitable, then centre-right voters look at that and go, oh my goodness, maybe we better shift back to the Tories. They really needed to knock the NDP out early, and I don't think they succeeded.
Well, as Yogi used to say,
it ain't over till it's over.
It ain't over till it's over, and there's still, 3 weeks is a long time in campaigns and politics, so we'll see what happens. Thank you all.